What if I told you there is no crisis at the border and everything you've been told about immigration over the past 3 years is a complete lie, designed to make money for-profit private prison companies? Allow me to explain. In January of 2021, President Joe Biden issued an executive order effectively banning for-profit private prison companies from operating federal prisons. But because many of these federal budgets overlap with state budgets, this effectively ended state for-profit prisons as well. If you're not aware of for-profit prisons, going back to 1987, the first for-profit prisons were built. Basically, we took prisons away from local sheriff's departments and had them operated by private companies. This was wildly lucrative for companies like CoreCivic and Geo Group. Joe Biden's executive order, however, contained one curious loophole. It only applied to U.S. citizens, meaning you could detain immigrants, but not U.S. citizens. So starting in 2021, we know that CoreCivic and Geo Group began spending millions of dollars lobbying, particularly Republicans in Tennessee and Texas, and I'll get back to this in a moment, trying to make sure that their business model would stay alive. And we know this because lobbying disclosures are federally mandated, meaning we can see exactly what they spend and who they're spending it with. And by the way, this is just one company. There's multiple, and they're spending millions of dollars every single year just on lobbying. We don't really know what they spend on communications because that's not federally mandated. And so that brings us to House Bill 2, the big immigration reform bill that you've probably heard so much about, keeping us safe from the immigration crisis at the border, because it's totally a crisis. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that H.R. 2 is incredibly dense, but I'll give you some of the highlights and what they mean. So in this particular section, what Customs and Border Patrol is supposed to do, right, is have real-time access to criminal history databases from a country of origin, such as Venezuela, El Salvador, Honduras, etc. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist, and I'll tell you why it's important that it doesn't exist. Guess what happens if Customs and Border Patrol can't get a hold of someone's criminal records? You guessed it, that person is detained. And who would do the detaining? Oh, I know, CoreCivic, Geo Group, and all the other private prisons. You see, they wrote this in a way that mandates that the FBI is somehow going to query databases in foreign countries that do not have the access for us to query their criminal history databases because they don't exist. This system is designed to fail. But wait, there's more, as Billy Mays might say. Let's talk about asylum. They have made asylum almost impossible to declare. Their goal is that asylum seekers should be put into detention facilities until we can know that they aren't knowingly trying to delay their removal simply by declaring asylum, which is legal. So the goal here is that you want to make people declare asylum, but then also say, we got to detain you until we know for sure that you're not just doing this to kind of do it. So once again, if you would like to declare asylum, you can. And when you do, where will you go? A detention facility. Oh, wait, it's another example of people going to detention facilities when they're trying to follow the law. Weird, huh? Now, let's say you've been here before. You have come here, you've worked on a farm, you've previously held an H-2A visa, and you'd like to go back and work on the same farm again. You can't do that. So what they'd like to do is strike from the record some of this old 1929 law from the Fair Labor Standards Act. I'm not going to go into the depth of it because it took me a while to summarize, but here's the gist. If you think you're coming to the United States to work on an H-2A visa and you intend to go back to the same place, you're going to have to go through another paperwork process. And if any of that paperwork is incorrect, what they're going to do is say that you're trying to lie. And what happens when you try and lie on your paperwork? Oh, right. We're going to detain you. So you better be really good at memorizing every single detail, because if any single number is wrong, we're going to assume you're a flight risk and do what? Detain you. And here, by the way, you know what? Hold on a second. This is where, and when I say my jaw dropped at just how direct and corrupt these assholes are, I was reading it and I was like, there's no fucking way they did this like so directly, but in fact they did. In the damn text of the bill, this is just the corruption, by the way. Specific facilities, the requirement under subsection A shall include at a minimum reopening or restoring the following facilities. Would you be surprised to find out that every single facility on this list, every single private, buried the lead, they're all private prisons that are operated by LaSalle or Geo Group or CoreCivic. Allow me to show you. Oh, they're very specific. I guess it's a private prison operated by LaSalle Corrections. Oh, and why were they closed to begin with? I don't know. Maybe it's because there were like allegations of abuse. Sorry about pepper spraying and flashbanging all the immigrants at your facility. Our bad. And also, apparently, they SA'd some of the immigrants in these facilities. Wonderful. Why are we reopening them again when we know they were terrible human rights violations? So let's be clear on HR 2, what this bill actually is when you dive in and read. It is a way to imprison as many people as possible, and in doing so, they're directly allowing the funding mechanism for-profit private prisons to have inventory, line items on accounts receivable, and those people are human beings, immigrants, who are being detained, sometimes indefinitely, because the language in this bill often uses the term detained indefinitely. That means we detain you as long as we want. And what happens when they're detained indefinitely? Every single person is a person that those private prison companies can charge for. But man, when I tell you it gets worse, it actually gets worse. This is an extremely clever act of lobbying that says that people under 21 are children. So this happens last year. Republicans somehow got a law passed that said that USCIS could say that the Child Status Protection Act would apply to people under 21, not 18, 21. So they gave themselves an extra 3 years. Allow me to explain why you might want to do this. The whole thing about, and actually let me dive into one other thing before we do this. You'll notice that in the text of this bill, the Republicans wax poetic about how many children are coming across unaccompanied. They're like, well, all these kids come on the border. You would just think there's an army of 8-year-olds coming into the United States, but that's not the case. It's mostly 15 to 17-year-olds. You got some 18 and 19-year-olds, and here's why. In a lot of countries, formal education ends at 14 or 15, and so at that point, they're in the workforce, and if there's not good work opportunities in their country, they might try and come here. So know and understand that the vast majority of quote-unquote minors or children coming here are people who are going to be looking for work as teenagers. And I'm not saying that, like, I want every 16-year-old working a job, but when I was 16 years old, I was doing like drywall with my uncles. So, I mean, I guess I could technically work a summer job. I mean, if I was capable, these people are too, but that's beside the point. The reason that they want so many people declared as minors is because under the text of how minors versus adults are billed, it costs more and they can bill the government more for detaining minors because minors require teachers and social workers, which are more people who are employed, which means they can pay more. It's so like, it's gross, man. The fact that they moved like the number up to 21, so the younger inventory would be worth more money. Like we call like the coyotes traffickers. This is for-profit human trafficking. Let's just call it what it is. And realistically, it's easy to understand why. When we look at people like, say, Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee, where Core Civic is headquartered, her largest PAC entity, except for FedEx, but FedEx is based in Memphis, and of course they're funding, Tennessee politicians, is Core Civic. They've given her hundreds of thousands of dollars over her career. So of course, when Marsha Blackburn gets up and says, we've got a crisis at the border, we got to do something about it. You know why she's saying that? Because the crisis allows the people who line her pockets in her campaign to build private prisons so that we can put immigrants in those prisons. She's doing things because they're paying her to do it. And it's not just her, by the way. It's like literally every single Tennessee Republican. When I say every single Tennessee Republican has received money from Core Civic, I mean every single one. And in the entirety of HR 2, there is very little mention of things that Customs and Border Patrol and the Department of Homeland Security have said they've asked for. For instance, we know that one of the main ways that people are getting through controlled points of entry, like road borders, is they use fake IDs, fake documentation. They've been asking for OCR tools, NLP tools that can reference existing databases to look and see whether or not these are valid identification. That not covered at all. We do get a little bit about ground sensors, radar sensors, and UAS systems, but nothing specific and no funding mechanism. Sorry, I thought there was a spider on me. I'm usually pretty cynical when it comes to bills that are introduced by Republicans, but this for me just really didn't sit right at all. And I think they're counting on most people not reading the entirety of this, and I did. I do not encourage you to sit down and read the entirety of House Resolution 2. It is dense, it's several hundred pages long, but when you do and you start taking notes, you will find that very little of this is designed to address any of the actual problems we face at the border, and everything to do with building more detention facilities, calling as many people criminals as possible, because when you call them criminals, you can put them in prison, obviously. Like, this is just a bailout for-profit prison companies. That's exactly what this bill is. We should call it what it is, and you should know. Wow, I used all 10 minutes. Hell yeah.